At just 12 years old, my 3 times great-grandmother, Dinah, was taken from West Africa, somewhere near what we now call Benin, back when that land was part of the Kingdom of Dahomey. She and her family were forced onto a slave ship that never should have touched water. A ship built on greed and the belief that people like them were property. They were brought to Mobile, Alabama, and there, Grandma Dinah was sold away from her family and sent to Snow Hill, never to see them again. She was just a child, alone in a world that had stolen everything familiar. But after emancipation, she and the husband she met, most likely while they were both still in bondage, made their way to Gee's Bend with 4 of their 5 children. And that's where their story becomes part of the Black history I like to share with you. In Gee's Bend, Grandma Dinah joined other formerly enslaved Black families, Native families, who had survived the Pettway plantation. One of her sons even worked on that plantation. And somewhere in the middle of all that hardship, she became the first documented quilter of Gee's Bend. She stitched warmth, survival, and memory into cloth at a time when quilts weren't art, they were life. The women of Gee's Bend quilted because they had no other way to keep their families warm. And yet from that necessity came an art form the world would one day celebrate. An art form my family helped perfect, preserve, and pass down. Gee's Bend has always been isolated. By river, by poverty, by design. But that isolation is also the reason I can tell you this story today. Because the people who stayed were documented, photographed, written about, even when they didn't know why, even when the world didn't yet understand what they were creating. Quilting has been passed down through my family from generations. Even those of us who don't quilt probably still know how. And while we didn't invent all the patterns, my ancestors made them unmistakable. They made them iconic. They made them art. And here's what many people don't realize. My family is still quilting. The art is still very much alive. The descendants are still here. The legacy is still breathing. So I want to take you on a journey through the evolution of an art form, through the evolution of a people, and through the story of how we're still carrying this legacy forward today. This is where the journey shifts from who we are to what we've created. And the first pattern we're going to explore is Pine Burr. Pine Burr is actually the quilt that first grabbed my attention. It's the one that made me stop and say, okay, there's something deeper happening here. And it makes sense because Pine Burr is carried forward by the sole documented inheritor of the pattern, Loretta Pettway Bennett, who also happens to be Dinah Miller's great-great-granddaughter. Recently, Loretta has been sharing her Pine Burr knowledge with other descendants, which is huge and honestly what Loretta and the women of Gee's Bend have always done. This is a pattern that reaches all the way back to West Africa, and she's passing it on in real time. One of the most powerful moments happened in 2026 when she taught a Pine Burr workshop at the Freedom Quilting Bee Legacy. But before we get to that, let's walk through how Pine Burr even made it to this moment. Pine Burr isn't just pretty. Those points and folds feel familiar because they show up all across West and Central African textiles. Star shapes, protective symbols, layered designs are people carried in their memory even when they couldn't carry anything else. And in our family, that connection comes through Dinah Miller. Her story, passed down by her great-granddaughter, Arlanta Pettway, is the reason we can trace that African memory inside our own line. That testimony is what lets us say Pine Burr didn't just show up out of thin air. It came through the women who held on to what they knew. So when we talk about Pine Burr, we're talking about a pattern that remembers Africa. The earliest Pine Burr we know of comes from Ella Mae Bennett Irby, who quilted between the 1950s and 1970s. Her Pine Burr isn't dated, but it shows early experimentation. The folded points, the structure, the discipline. It represents the pre-documentation era, when women were quilting long before anyone thought to write it down. We get our first officially documented Pine Burr in 1976, made by China Grove Myles. Her quilt is the first one with a confirmed date, which makes her the anchor, the starting point of the documented Pine Burr lineage. In the 1980s, Arie Pettway creates her Pine Burr. Hers sits right in the middle of the lineage, showing the pattern continuing, practiced, and held inside the bin during that in-between period. In the 90s, Lucy Mingo created her Pine Burr. Hers is precise, disciplined, and beautifully controlled. And because China Grove Myles was her husband's aunt, Lucy is quilting inside a family line where Pine Burr had already been documented and practiced before her. Her quilt becomes the second major documented Pine Burr and helps solidify the pattern's presence in late 20th century G's bin. And then we get to Loretta Pettway Bennett. She finished her Pine Burr in 1997, and a few years later, in 2005, it became Alabama's official state quilt, the only state quilt in the whole country. That moment didn't just honor her quilt, it honored the line she comes from. Because when you look at her Pine Burr, you can trace the whole story right through it. From Africa to Dinah to Sally to Arlanza to Quinny to Loretta to state quilt. That's not just a pattern, that's a family line doing what it's always done, carrying something forward. And then in 2026, Loretta goes back and teaches Pine Burr at the Freedom Quilting Bee Legacy. That's the full circle moment. Everything that built this pattern, the African root, the bin tradition, the Pettway Bennett line, even the state recognition, all of it lands right back in the hands of the descendants who are ready to keep it going. That's the living continuation of Pine Burr, and that's the very epitome of who my family is. And today, Loretta Pettway Bennett is still the only person who can stand in that place, the only genealogically and documentably correct Pine Burr living legacy quilter. She carries Grandma Dinah's memory, the Pettway spirit, the Bennett discipline, all of that history straight into the present.